Welcome to all of you from other side of the screen and here in the room. Welcome to the lecture Anti-Racism, Unity in Diversity, Why Does That Not Work? We are happy here that we can discuss tonight this very important subject. Usually this subject is framed in a very positive way, promoting unity in diversity, but this evening we're going to question why that not work and how it can work better. So, as we find ourselves here in Brussels, in the European Union headquarters, not far away where our faculty is based, Faculty of Protestant Theology and Religious Studies, we are very happy that we can discuss this very important subject. So, as I said, the subject for tonight is anti-discrimination legislation in Europe, but we are actually very happy that for this evening we are going to go beyond European continent because we have speakers who are also coming from different continents in our world. And I will just announce our speakers for this evening. This is first, one of our speakers is Ms. Audrey Kitagba. I will just, good evening to you, Audrey, in New York. I will just say a brief part of your very rich biography. So Audrey Kitagba is the president and the founder of the International Academy for Multicultural Cooperation, the president of the Light of Awareness International Spiritual Family, the chair of the Anti-Racism Initiative and co-chair of the Gender Equality Working Group of the G20 Interfaith Forum, and former advisor to the Office of the Special Representative of Secretary General for Children and Armed Conflict at United Nations. So if you would like to learn a little bit more about Audrey Kitagba experience, please Google her name and go and visit the Academy for Multicultural Cooperation that she founded. And I need to say, as we are sitting together in the board of the G20 Interfaith Forum, Audrey is one of the pillars of the G20 Interfaith Forum, leading this important initiative on anti-racism and gender equality. Audrey, warm welcome to you. Another speaker for this evening is a very good colleague and a friend, Ivan Dewer. I hope I pronounced well your second name. Thank you so much, Ivan, for coming here and being present at our faculty. Ivan also has very rich biography. I will just say a small part, and that is that Ivan has been working as social worker. He has been also working as a headhunter for top managers, so he has professional business experience, and also CEO of SNE. You can explain us a little bit more later what does that mean. Currently, he's employed by the Ministry of Justice, right, of Belgium for De Mensen, where he's focusing on international representation and interfaith diplomacy. And he's also working as humanist counselor and chaplain at Brussels Airport. And we as a faculty have also one project, and maybe this is an opportunity for cooperation in the future on this matter. And he is also has started as the candidate reserve officer expert in interfaith dialogue. This is really very important moment, I think, for our faculty, because it's very important to open our horizons and to work together also with humanists who are present in this city and who always have some constructive suggestions how we can improve the concept unity in diversity. Last but not least, we have our student, Betty Ongata, who is a student of master's degree. Welcome, Betty, to you.
Thank you, Professor.
She is from Kenya, and she came here to study theology at the Protestant faculty and religious studies in Brussels. And she will share her experience with us on gender equality for women of color and racism and anti-discrimination. And we go back to, I think, Madrid, to the ambassador Alvaro Albacete, who is representing Union for Mediterranean Higher Education and Research. Good evening to you, Ambassador. He's Deputy General Secretary in charge of higher education and research since September 2022. Excuse me. He is the career diplomat of Spain, and prior to his current assignment, he served as Deputy Head of Cabinet or Foreign Minister, Director General of the separate Israeli Center, and Ambassador at Large responsible for relations of Spain with Jewish communities and organizations. More recently, Ambassador Albaceter has held the position of Deputy General Secretary of the International Dialogue Center called CAICID, and he has been a diplomatic advisor in the Office of Prime Minister of Spain. He has a very rich diplomatic service in his career diplomat. I know, Your Excellency, that you have been just landing, and we are very pleased and happy that you could join us here in the Zoom meeting. Without further ado, I have been preparing just a glimpse about anti-racism based on the, let's say, reports of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency. I have been working with the EU Fundamental Rights Agency, with the Fundamental Rights Agency for many years, monitoring their progress reports, because the EU Fundamental Rights Agency has a task to do research and recommendations to the European Commission how to improve the EU legislation in the area of anti-discrimination law, also in the area of migration and asylum seeker, refugees, etc. So if we are looking, as we are in the seat of the European Union here in Brussels, we can see that in the legislation framework of the European Union, we have lots of directives which are related to the anti-discrimination legislation. So one directive is 2043 of the European Commission against discrimination on the grounds of race and ethnic origin. Another one from 2078 against discrimination at work on the grounds of religion or belief, disability, age, or sexual orientation. Then we have Directive 2006 on equal treatment for men and women in matters of employment and occupation. Then we have Directive 2004, equal treatment of men and women in the access to and supply goods and services. Directive proposal against discrimination based on age, disability, sexual orientation, and religion or belief beyond the workplace. These directives are very important to be implemented as such. So there is no discretion. The member state needs to take the text exactly as they are and implement them in their national legislation. But even though in Europe we have developed all these, let's say, laws to protect minorities and on different grounds like sex, race, color, ethnic or social origin, genetic feature, language, religion or belief, political or any other opinion, still, also national minority, property, birth, disability, age, or sexual orientation. So discrimination on all these grounds is prohibited. But we can see still that discrimination is happening. And as you can see in the screen, these are just some results of the research from the EU Fundamental Rights Agency report from 2008, and the name of the report is Being Black in the EU. And of course, we are going to go beyond discrimination based on the color. We can see that in 2018, 1 of every 3 Black person experienced racial harassment. 4 in 10 say nothing would change if they would report discrimination or harassment or any sort of bullying, abuse, and so on. 4 from 10 Jews consider immigrating because they do not feel safe as Jews here in the European Union. Political hate speech and right-wing extremism targeting Muslims and refugees have become mainstream across the EU. Then racist harassment and violence is common in the EU but remains invisible in official statistics because there is no reporting and adequate reporting, and we will see that people do not report because they don't believe that something will change actually after their reporting. Then discriminatory racial profiling remains concerned from 4 to 10 Black people stopped by the police say it was because of their skin color. And then response is lacking. We can see that 15 out of 28 EU member states have dedicated action plans and strategies to combat racism and ethnic discrimination. So this battle for equal treatment and equal opportunities in Europe and the world, it remains. So as we have a very rich let's say, contributions to this evening. I'm not going to go to the presentation. I would just warmly invite you to visit the website of the EU Fundamental Rights Agency and to visit and to read if you're interested in this topic and in further research on the anti-racism. And look at the statistics which is changing and see basically what are the challenges that people of all these grounds, and there are many, there are more than 10 grounds, are facing, like racist harassment, like people being stopped with the police, like violence-motivated racism, like discrimination and awareness of the rights, because so many people are not aware of the rights that they have, neither where to go if they face the problem. And now we come also, one last remark from my side, European Union has this motto, unity in diversity. That means working together for peace, human rights and justice on our continent, bringing common markets together, and for better cooperation, economic cooperation, which actually help after Second World War healing our continent, because actually everything started with trade and economic agreements. And then these values of peace and justice were developed further on in the EU legislation and especially in current Lisbon Treaty. But somehow this unity in diversity, it is very nice when we hear, but actually it does not work for everyone. And this is what we are going to discuss tonight, why it does not work for everyone. So Audrey, we start with you. Please tell us something. You're advising G20 Interfaith Forum on anti-racism, and you have been leading many initiatives. You have been taking various perspectives on anti-discrimination and also writing recommendations for the G20 economies on anti-racism. Can you tell us what were your findings in this regard?
Okay, well, thank you so much, Elizabeta, and hello, everyone from New York City. I really appreciate, Elizabeta, you're giving the European perspective with respect to the human rights frameworks and instruments that have been created. And I think this perspective is very important. I appreciate your asking me about the G20 Interfaith Forum. I also wanted to put this in the larger frame of the work of the United Nations, as well as the international legal instruments, conventions, etc., that has been created by the United Nations. However, specifically with respect to your question, let me explain, first of all, what the G20 Interfaith Forum is. And it builds on the vital roles that religious institutions and beliefs play in world affairs. And it reflects the rich diversity of institutions, ideas, and values. And these include interfaith and intercultural organizations, religious leaders, scholars, development and humanitarian entities, and business and civil society actors. So there is a recognition that multilateral engagement is an important means of acknowledging the significant role of stakeholders that represent different aspects of our global and local communities. So this necessarily reflects already the diversity that exists in our world. And racism is a very complex issue, and it touches upon all levels in society in its institutional, structural, cultural, and systemic manifestations. And the IF20's anti-racism initiative, which I chair, sees racism as a cross-cutting issue that addresses the many different ways in which racism is prevalent in society. And this initiative assumes explicit responsibility within the IF20 to work towards the eradication of racism and to work towards advancing the goal of racial equality and equity by every means available. So the Declaration on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, which was created by the United Nations, says it solemnly affirmed the necessity of speedily eliminating racial discrimination throughout the world in all its forms and manifestations, and securing understanding of and respect for the human dignity of human persons. And it is convinced that the doctrine of superiority based on racial differentiation is scientifically false, morally condemnable, socially unjust and dangerous, and that there is no justification for racial discrimination in theory and in practice anywhere. So the Anti-Racism Initiative specifically affirms its commitment to and support of all international instruments outlawing racism in all its forms, including the United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples. So, people are not to be commodified or instrumentalized, but really cherished. And as people of faith, we affirm the precious worth of every life as an obvious consequence of divine love and compassion. And now, with respect to, because the IF20 really does work with policy recommendations and the intersectionality of civil society and the G20 summit leaders, the IF20's anti-racism initiative has come out with a specific policy recommendation to the G20 summit leaders about creating a commission to study this aspect of racism and to have, a panel of experts convened and to really make recommendations to the G20 summit leaders on how we can best address this issue of racism. So, Elizabeta, you also raised a very important part that regardless of all of these international instruments that have been created, you've, mentioned the European Union, and of course, because of our many years of work with the United Nations itself has also created a lot of international legal instruments, beginning with its own preamble and the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the preamble to the UN Charter, the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the International Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Racial Discrimination, and all the many, the 3 world conferences it's held on racism, racial discrimination, xenophobia, and related intolerances, which are held in 1978, 1983, and 2001. And so it's also held observances, which include an International Day for the Elimination of Racial Discrimination, an International Day of Remembrance of Victims of Slavery and the Transatlantic Slave Trade, Nelson Mandela International Day, and the UNESCO International Day for the Remembrance of the Slave Trade and its abolition. So the UN has established also certain years to observe racism, such as the International Year of Action to Combat Racism and Racial Discrimination, as well as decades. For example, the Decade for Action to Combat Racism and Racial Discrimination. So what we do see, and I think I build on what Elizabeta has opened her remarks with, is that yes, there are a vibrant, robust international legal instruments which seeks to address the racism issue and the discrimination issue. But she also asks a deep question with respect to posed in the question about what can religious theologians and religious institutions do to really address this aspect of the pervasiveness and the persistence of racism. Well, first of all, we have to understand that racism comes out of this need for self-interest and self-protection, and the perceptual fields that are created by our own, enculturations, etc. So, like, for example, in the United States, we have this growing anti-racism that has been affecting not only people, the Black people, but Asian people. and, immigrant populations. So it is this perception that the perceived incursion of people within your own community. And of course, I think Europe is also experiencing this, a huge anti-immigrant backlash. That it speaks to and the polarization politically as well, especially unfortunately within religious communities that perceive the incursion of foreigners as taking away their livelihood, their identities, their culture, and so they frame it as a threat. And part of the work of the religious communities is to be able to address these aspects of racism. So, diversity is one of the words that we hear often in our culture today. And in the United States, we are increasingly becoming more diverse along racial and ethnic lines. And according to the Brookings Institute in 2019, nearly 40% of the United States is now non-white compared to 30% in 2000. So the Census Bureau projects that by the year 2045, which is just around the corner, the United States will be majority non-white. So the surveys from Pew and Barna have also shown the growing religious diversity in the United States, and with those identifying as Christian declining and those identifying as religiously unaffiliated on the rise. So the U.S. has been a country of immigrants, and we continue to see the influx of immigrant populations today. So the diversity has definitely caused political and societal tensions and polarizations. And as we witness the growing fear of these diverse groups of people coming into the country who also want to benefit from their own ideations of what America stands for. So the global diversity perspective gave its definition of diversity as empowering people by respecting and appreciating what makes them different. And it means understanding one another by surpassing simple tolerance to ensure people truly value their differences. And I want to cite the work of Queensborough Community College here in New York, which really prides itself for its diversity. And this is what they say about it. Diversity means more than just acknowledging and or tolerating difference. Diversity is a set of conscious practices that involve understanding and appreciating interdependence of humanity, cultures, and the natural environment, practicing mutual respect for qualities and experiences that are different from our own, understanding that diversity includes not only ways of being, but also ways of knowing, recognizing that personal, cultural, and institutionalized discrimination creates and sustains privileges for some while creating and sustaining disadvantages for others, and that building alliances across differences so that we can work together to eradicate all forms of discrimination is very important. So with respect to the question that you had posed for this seminar that's in your flyer, what can theologians do? And I will posit that it would be good for theologians, and not just theologians, but every single one of us, to share some of the beautiful references made to this concept of unity in diversity, which is really a spiritual value common to many religious and faith traditions. And I'll just cite, some examples here. So the Muslim Sufi author, Abdul al-Qadim al-Jili, in his book, Universal Man, described the universe as unity in diversity and diversity in unity. And in the Hindu concept of Advaita Vedanta, the external world and Brahman, the ultimate reality, are not separate. It is a philosophy of non-duality that sees Brahman as real, but the world in which we live as an illusion, and all the diverse aspects of the external world are in fact unified in Brahman. And the unity and diversity concept is a really essential principle in the Baha'i faith. So Abdul Baha said, in reality, all are members of one family, children of one heavenly Father. Humanity may be likened unto vari-colored flowers of one garden, and there is unity in diversity. Each sets off and enhances the other's beauty. So in recent times, three giants of modern thought, leadership, and inspiration have been Nelson Mandela, Mahatma Gandhi, and Dr. Martin Luther King. And they advocated for inclusion and unity in their history-making missions. And Dr. King beautifully stated that life at its best is a creative synthesis of opposites in fruitful harmony. So if we look to our own religious sacred texts and scriptures, we will see that the articulation of the spiritual value of being able to see the beauty of the unifying force in the field of diversity is a very important aspect to be able to embrace and to practice. And Mother Teresa said, only humility will lead us to unity, and unity will lead us to peace. And His Holiness the Dalai Lama said, if we wish to ensure everyone's peace and happiness, we need to cultivate a healthy respect for the diversity of our peoples and cultures, founded on an understanding of this fundamental sameness of all human beings. So we strive to be able to understand each other in our diversity. And, neighbor love is very complex and challenging because it requires moral transformation in our own basic values, practices, and institutions. So this means we have to examine ourselves and the kinds of prejudices and biases that we have. And it also compels us to be innovative, finding new solutions to old problems. And all of this makes life really, Elizabetha, a grand adventure of discovery of ourselves, each other, and life itself. So thank you very much.
Much, Audrey, for this amazing input and also putting anti-racism and unity and diversity in a broader context of United Nations, where you have very rich experience dealing also with G20 economists and also presenting these recommendations how to bring more equality. Your input was very, very rich, and I saw that many people here around the table took also the notes, and I'm sure also people from other parts of the screen did the same. About, dealing with the institutional, cultural, and structural phenomenon, I think this is a very long way to go. I mean, we all need to make lots of effort, and also I take for further discussion this question, how we can combat prejudices and privileges to bring more equality and equity forward. Now we turn to Ivan, who is representing humanist organization. Ivan, from perspective of humanists, I mean, you will speak on behalf of yourself and so on, but from your rich experience here in Brussels, what do you think, why unity and diversity does not work for everyone? What we should do to move equality and equal opportunities forward for everyone?
Thank you very much for your question. You raised a little bit the answer saying why it doesn't work in Brussels. I understood that Brussels won the prize of the most diverse city in the world recently. We have the biggest quantity of people with different nationalities housed here, and in my perspective, I think it works quite well. But I agree with you, and I agree with what the previous Madam Kitawaga was saying. There are amazing international opportunities to tackle racism, but let's be serious. Racism is on the rise in the entire world. I mean, when you look at political ideologies that are coming up, let's look at the policies of Trump or even Putin. Let's look at Bolsonaro in Brazil, Duarte. Let's look at the elections this weekend in Italy, where we see a post-fascist leader who's coming into power. And all over Europe, all over even in Africa and in Asia, we see a steep rise of racist ideologies that are winning elections and coming up. And so I think it's a very tricky topic to tackle for us as for theologians, but also for human rights activists in the future. I may start with a little controversial analysis. I was always triggered to understand why racism exactly exists. How does it work in the brain? I think the brain is a good start to analyze a phenomenon like that. And when we analyze the primitive brain is wired technically to how shall I say, to like what you know and to fear what you don't know. We have an instinct to be fearful of things that are new, that are unknown, that are incalculable, and we have a primitive wiring to crave and to like the structure, the things we know. When we look at the emotions that children and human adult beings feel towards their own family, it's always higher in intensity than with unknown people. We love our family a little bit more than the other families, our streets, our village. We like our village. We're proud of being born in a town, in a country. We have this patriotism that is present in every single human being, and that technically, in my opinion, could be seen as the emergence of the rationality of racist ideologies from a neural perspective. Now, when you analyze the way the world is organized, when you try to analyze it in very simple terms, you see that sovereignty of the state is the basis of the international system. I mean, it started in Montevideo by defining what a country is, and nowadays you could not think any world system without respecting this kind of holy sovereignty of the states. But when you analyze it from a neutral perspective, it's completely artificial. I mean, every border, every country border, it's an agreement between people who are living in a certain area, but there is no other value to the concept of border and sovereignty of the states than the one that we give. It's a kind of artificial organization of the world, and the United Nations and the EU are I think a kind of next step in the evolution of human organization, because they try to unite a group of countries. When you look at the African Union, the Asian Union, the European Union, these were all initiatives aiming to unite bigger quantities of countries. But I think that without tackling the existence of the sovereignty of the states as such, you cannot tackle this sense of nationalism, of patriotism, that is also at the root of racist conceptions. Now, luckily we evolved, and luckily our brain evolved. We distanciated from this craving to know what we care, and we developed capacity to be curious about the unknown, to crave to discover new things, to get out of our comfort zone. And I think this neural evolution is also the key in understanding why we distanciated from racism, why the United Nations and the EU developed all these standards to abolish concept of racism. But somehow we must accept and constatate that it doesn't work. I mean, if it would work, there would not be such a steep rise of racist political ideologies all over the world. You asked me also to think from a religious point of view. Now, for a non-believer, it's always tricky to formulate a position on religion, because you position yourself a little bit outside of the concept. So I'm going to try to formulate it in a way. But when I analyze the theology, all the different religions, I tend to have the feeling that religions claim to have an explanatory system to understand why we live and why we exist and why society should be. They also have a set of moral values, and you should not kill, not steal, not lie, not and so on and so forth, which is amazing, I think. But when I analyze the differences between religion, I tend to understand that every religion considers itself as the only every explanatory truth, and that they also tend to consider the other religions as less true or less right. Now, I like the analysis you made, Madam Kitagawa, by drawing the similarity that unites all religious people in the world, and I do think that it's a good way to a solution. But when I observe the essence of religious rulings, and I speak about Islamic law, Jewish law, Hindu law, canonic law, every time the religion intended to build up rules for the entire society, they also put in the rules that they are the exclusive truth, and that other beliefs are not really part of their equation or their vision on the world. Maybe apart for some modern religions who emerged recently and really encompassed the existence of other religions. Now, if you look at the history, I mean, Judaism, Christianism, Islam, there is a chronology in the periodicity when religions emerge, and you also see that the sets of rules and the sets of relations with other religion changed throughout this religious history. But anyway, I mean, most religions have systems to abolish apostasy. Apostasy is rules where you decide to step out of your religion, or blasphemy. When I look at Islam, for instance, claiming that another God is true could be considered as a form of blasphemy, is therefore illegal. But also in Catholicism or other religions, there are a lot of regulations against blasphemy. So I wouldn't go as far as saying that religions could be one of the catalysts for racism, but I do think that very, very deeply conservative religious people may have more difficulty to accept and understand the value of other religions, and therefore other cultures, other ways of looking at the same. But it's a very daunting position to defend in this. You would bear my. When I look at every single religion, what I particularly appreciate is that I observe that every religion has a very progressive strands and very conservative strands. That the progressive strands most of the time have a broader, open-minded, tolerant, pluralist vision of life, and that the ultra-conservative strands have less propensity to accept and acknowledge the existence and the rights to evolve of other people. Now, the religious currents that caused problems, if I dare to use these words, in the latest centuries were the more conservative ones. When I look at the jihadi Islamic fundamentalist radical movements, they were extremely conservative. When I look at maybe the Crusades is a bit long ago, but there was also a craving at some moment in the history of Catholicism of imposing their religion to others, and these are the moments where we go south, and I dare to think that we as theologians, but that will be part of my conclusion, should try to find ways to tackle the very, very conservative strands in any type of religion, or at least invite them to open up and to accept, to tolerate the existence of other strands of religion or even other beliefs. That would be ideal. Now, I do think that interfaith dialogue is kind of key to open, when you put a Jew, a Muslim, a Christian, a Buddhist, Orthodox, Anglican, and so on and so forth around the table, they might be convinced that they all have the only truth and their neighbor are wrong, but at least they're ready to sit at the table, to talk to each other, to learn about each other's values, and to build a consensus, which I think is the way forward. Now, what to do as theologians? I would dare to propose that it could be useful to reinterpret this unicity, this exclusiveness of religion, but that's a very tricky one. Who am I as a non-religious to propose something like that? But I like what Madame Kitagawa was saying, because she puts the finger on those few surahs that talk about this diversity of religions. And I think in every religion, if every religious book and in every religious theological, scientific thoughts, there are arguments to foster this exclusivity and this unicity, but there are also arguments that foster this openness of mind and this tolerance. And maybe those are the surahs and the visions and the religious insights that we should promote and embrace in order to teach the religious followers to also open up their minds, try to really tackle this radicality and this conservatism in favor of more progressive and open-minded vision. Now, I like the concept of dialogue and diversity because that's the key. It's not always easy. Elizabeth knows it because she's also part of the interfaith dialogue at the European Parliament. But sometimes around the table, you hear people talk about very modern subjects like artificial intelligence or ecology and sustainability, and who refer to passages of the Torah, the Quran, and the Bible, which is really, really progressive, I think. But I don't think that when the Torah and the Bible and the Quran were written, that the concept of artificial intelligence as such was already. But that's the start towards building bridges. Now. I think theologians should engage more in collaborative projects like that. Should really try to push their students to change their perspective on their religion in order to accept and understand. I would even dare to suggest that a comparative critical theological study could be an interesting topic, because all the theologians who went and studied about other religions have this wisdom in understanding how to build bridges between the communities. Let's be clear, the world is mixing up. That's what I was saying a little bit on the patriotic, and it was not a racist way, but it could sound racist to say Brussels is the most multicultural city. I'm not more proud of Brussels than any other city in the world, but the world is mixing up. You have Jewish quarters, Italian quarters, African quarters in every city, in every capital of the world. That's good. That's the richness. I love to be able to eat Thai and tomorrow to have a South American dish and stuff like that. I mean, we are all very happy, and that's the only way the world will be forward. Racists can be unhappy about it, and far-right ideologies may win the elections at this moment of history, but in the end we will win, and the world will become more diverse. Wanting it or not, I think even genetics actually proved it. Genetic science proved that the greater the difference between the genetic material of the father and the mother, the better the genetic material of the children are. Meaning, the more mixing up there is between cultures, the better quality of evolution we will have, and the more healthy we will become, and the more intelligent and more, I mean, this is not me. This is just science who observe that. You can. The counterpart of this theory is on islands, for instance, where culture had to mix up together for many generations. You see the degenerescence of the quality of the genetic material. So mixing up society is the future, and the question is not whether or not it's good or not, but how we will tackle it. Maybe last but not least, I think it's very nice for us. We are all open-minded people here around the table and behind the screen who are already anti-racist and who are already open-minded. But the problem is not us. The problem is those who just voted for this Italian fascist prime minister, and who will vote in Belgium for the Flemish Nationalist Party, and in France with Marine Le Pen. These people are not open-minded, and maybe it is to us as a mission, to go and talk to them. I think when you look at how racist groups are negotiating, they are much smarter than us, the progressive intellectual people. They use Twitter and TikTok and Snapchat, and we all think it's a very populist way of communicating, but this is why they win the elections. They talk to the youth, they widespread their venomous vision of white supremacy or black supremacy or Asian supremacy or whatever in a much more efficient way than us. And we've always been maybe reluctant to do that, but I think this is part of the solution. Is just to go back to the streets, go back to the poor neighborhoods, and go talk to the people. Launch social projects here. We have to be more present in the fields they are present, because that's also one of the places where we lose the fight. And then we don't need a lot of academic intellectual work. We need to be really ground level and grassroots level if you want to succeed. This is the short ideas I want to expose you. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ivan, for this great input and also for this very real assessment of religion. It's always very interesting to listen somebody from the humanist perspective because usually we are in our interfaith circles, so we almost know a little bit of what you have explained, the common positions and so on, but it's always very good to have this analytical outside of the box, like we're thinking, and very big thanks to you for taking your time and coming tonight to our faculty, because that's exactly the point of all of us gathering, like being diverse and having diversity around also this table and looking, how we can enhance, through the research, different comparative theological theories and maybe preparing better policy. This is what Audrey is basically doing, for the G20 Interfaith Forum side, advising also United Nations and advising also G20 economies. So, and of course, your invitation to do more of interfaith, not only dialogue, I would go further, interfaith cooperation and also cooperation and co-creation and also including humanists and non-believer. And this is where we are on the side, and this is how we better can win this racist and eradicate it. Okay, the eradication is a very high goal and aim that we are, as advocates, we want to achieve. But I think going together we can achieve in this regard. So thank you so much for your points. We go to our student Betty. Betty, welcome to you. And you have been doing various research on women's rights and environment.
Yes.
And please tell us something from where your interest comes from. Like in dealing with gender equality as a woman of color, you will be the future religious leader, or maybe professor in the school, or maybe professor in the faculty. We don't know yet, or human rights advocate. So, how do you feel from everything what you have heard from Audrey and Ivan? What is your take on that?
Thank you, everybody. Audrey and Evan, I really appreciate the previous speakers and everything that they've shared with all of us. It's actually a lot for me to process, because I remember when I was sitting down to look at my subject of the day-to-day, for example, I was trying to look at the perspective of problems of anti-racism. And one of my areas that was in my mind, most of it was to do with intersectionality of Black women. So you realize that as a Black woman, in most cases, or a few cases or instances, we experience a lot of color that is faced between passive racism, that is from, allow me to say this, the white people, and we also experience patriarchy from the Black people. So as women, as a gender women, we are caught in between when we do not know where to go to or where to feel more comfortable or to be able to assert ourselves. Now, as a theologian or a theological student, one of the things that the Bible teaches us is that we are all children of God, siblings, cousins, brothers, and sisters, and therefore any form of bigotry, racism, stereotyping, sexism, ageism are really pointless and ultimately destructive. So I will take one of the quotes by one of the men I admire, the late Reverend Archbishop Reverend Desmond Tutu. I'm an Anglican, and we had this earlier on in the day talking about the Ubuntu. And he said that a person is a person only through persons. You can be generous only because you learn from another to be generous. We were created to be members for one family, and that is God's family. That goes together with our earlier speaker, Audrey, what she shared with us from other religious perspectives. So when you realize all the people who went ahead of us, they have a common message of trying to unite human races or people without looking at color or background. So I also noted from my own observation when I was looking at this, that there is institutional racism that exists that is neither as passive as claimed, but this also varies from one region or another. Thank God Brussels or Belgium is a bit better than some of the places all over the world. But you realize that when a person is dishonest, dishonesty is dishonesty, whether it is coming from a senior person or a small person or anybody, wherever, that remains to be the fact that it is dishonesty. So the trouble in most of us who are racist or racism, we try to remain perfectly accepting for these other things like sexism, as I had just said, but there is also a group that we women or the gender feel more affected when we are disadvantaged. And that is the children who get ignored a lot of times, and yet they're the ones who suffer most. For example, I would use different facts where racism has made parents choose not to have children, or because you're having a girl child in your family, you feel like that child is not good enough. The child is not favored, or the child is not equal to their task. So these ones have also made most of the colored people, like me, for example, become try to find the right word that would make it comfortable. But this is a position that most women within the society face, but they will not speak about it. They will not talk about it. So racism that comes from the historic consequences of the natural struggle for a woman is, for me, between oppressor and the oppressed in most cases, if not all cases. One, we face patriarchy. Two, we face this soft or gentle use of words that are not kind. For example, some myths that other people have about Black women being maybe, what can I say, very sexually active, for example, more than other women. And that makes this woman who is a colored woman feel out of place. Now, my position as a Christian, a theological one, because I am a Christian, is that the epistle of St. Paul, where it says that there is no Jew, no Greek, neither man nor woman, but we are all in Christ, should uphold. As a theologian, that should uphold and that should guide us when we're discussing gender issues, without necessarily looking at it from the angle of a feminist or a non-feminist, white or Black. Whereas all these are good, but personally I would uphold that from a Christian perspective. When I see a person, I see a beautiful vessel, like a gift that has just been wrapped, carrying a soul. So for me, that soul within that person forms the kind of person that I would want my Christian responsibility to respond to. But unfortunately, in most cases, we find that the stereotyping usually comes from Christians. So maybe if we can learn more to be able to endure as women, because women get to suffer more of bad treatments than men. And this is world over. From where I come from, go to the East and any other part of the country or the world, then it would be something that is for us to appreciate a woman and a girl child in the society, and even allow girls to be able to inherit, because you find in some cultures where I come from, when a parent is old enough and needs to pass their inheritance, then a girl child is always left out, and this is given to the male children. So if you did not have male children in the family, then it will be passed to probably male cousins and things like that. So that is my view, or my opinion and my take on this subject. I did an earlier on paper on women and environment, but that is for another day. We'll check with my professor. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Betty, for this wonderful insights and especially underlining gender perspective and in the anti-racism. You have also applause here on screen, Betty, from Betty, from our colleague here at faculty. So the gender perspective, we are going especially to tackle in another webinar where we will have again Audrey with us, and that is in a few months from now, where we are going to tackle is there gender inequality and equality in religion and society. I think it's very, very important, Betty, what you have said, that to address this patriarchy. Also, as being a white woman, I have some experience on that, so we can share it afterwards over the drinks. So this is still something to be further discussed. And without further ado, we go to His Excellency Alvaro Albacete in Spain. Alvaro, you have heard also a very constructive proposal from Ivan that we should actually do comparative analytical theological studies and studies in general, learning from one another in order to open-mind our views. And your task since recently is actually to bridge and to make this, let's say, multicultural and exchange between universities in the higher education and research. Can you tell us a little bit how Spanish government and how exactly this, your organization, Union for Mediterranean Higher Education and Research, is dealing through education to the higher education and the research toward racism? The floor is yours.
So thank you very much, Elisabetta, for inviting me to this exchange of views. I take the opportunity to say hello to Audrey as well. We had the opportunity to work together in the past in the framework of the G20 Interfaith Forum, as well as in the advisory forum to the UN. And I remember that period of time with enthusiasm. And I wanted to say hello to you as well. So you have framed with a conceptual explanation about the situation in Europe, and also about the situation in the UN and the world as a whole. And my approach is going to be more practical, based on our experience in a geographical area, which is the Mediterranean area. So I'm going to try to give an answer to one of your questions, Elisabetta, when you asked us to give our views on what international community could do to combat racism. And my answer is going to be limited to the area of the Mediterranean. So the first thing I want to say is that this exchange of views is very pertinent. I think that in the international community speaks less and less about racism. And when it does so, it is already too late, because there has been dramatic reasons to do so. And it happened with the movement of Black Lives Matter. So the right moment to do so is right now. And I want to emphasize that. So it's important to speak about that. It's important to acknowledge that discrimination based on race and ethnic origin remains, so persists. And it's also important to continue working in the direction of prevention in terms of building respect and tolerance. And that is what we are doing at the Union for the Mediterranean. I want to connect with what the previous speaker said about the sovereignty of states. And we are trying to overcome that idea of national states by creating an area of common understanding in the Mediterranean. So that's the ultimate purpose of the Union for the Mediterranean. And please be aware that the organization is not called Union of the Mediterranean, but Union for the Mediterranean. And the reason why it is called that way is because it's still a process of building something. that we don't know when will happen. But the area as a whole is very diverse, and the challenges are enormous, because the Mediterranean area is the least integrated area in the world, and it's also an area where the difference between the northern and the southern countries is the highest in terms of wealth. Average of GDP per capita of southern Mediterranean countries is less than 1/8 of the European Union. So you can see the enormous differences between the northern and southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. Still, the political will is there. There are 42 member states working together, trying to have a more integrated area. And within those 42 member states, we have the 27 European members, plus the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries, including Israel, Palestine, Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, and so on and so forth. So what can we do in the Mediterranean area to tackle the issue of racism? So we know, and that is part of the literature against racism, that the racism is based on stereotypes, that has been mentioned by our colleague before, and prejudices. And those stereotypes and prejudices are caused by lack of knowledge of the other, are caused by the distorted image of the other. So the answer of the Union for the Mediterranean is that we have to combat the distorted image of the other, and we do it in two ways. The first is we work for a more integrated area of the Mediterranean from an economic and also from a cultural point of view. And so we implement on a daily basis activities to make our societies, northern and southern societies, more cohesive. And the second, and that is where I want to emphasize my intervention, is that we work on youth in the area of education. So the question for the Union for the Mediterranean is how we can improve the knowledge of the other at that level, at the level of youth and students. And I will give you an example that you will understand perfectly. I mean, those who are with you sharing the table, Elisabetta, in Europe, I'm sure that you have heard about the Erasmus program in our continent, and you know how successful it has been for many years, getting closer countries from the north and the south, east, west, and overcoming the stereotypes and the prejudices that we people from the south could have about the northern societies and the other way around as well. So we have to acknowledge that has been a very useful instrument to overcome stereotypes in our societies. And that is exactly what we want to implement for the rest of the Mediterranean countries. So we want to facilitate the change of students between the north and the south, between the north and the eastern Mediterranean countries. The political will is there. So after many years of discussion, the members of the European Union, the 27 members, not the UK, so the 27 members adopted a decision some years ago to expand the Erasmus program to the southern and eastern Mediterranean countries. But for those years, the implementation of this initiative has been very difficult. And I have to say that only in few cases in Turkey and in Israel, it has been successful. So there are many challenges to do so, many reluctancy at a very technical level, so the recognition of title, the accreditation of professors. So there is a cultural obstacle there to acknowledge and the titles and the accreditation of professors, but the political will is there, and that is very important, and that is part of my portfolio. So I'm constantly meeting presidents and rectors of universities, trying to engage them in the process of facilitating the change of students from the north to the south and the other way around. The objective, the ultimate objective, as I said before, is not actually the change itself. Is that we acknowledge that by doing so, we promote intercultural dialogue and we help to overcome the stereotypes and prejudices that I referred to before. So to facilitate the knowledge of other culture between the European Union and the immediate neighbors of Europe is key in this program, and that connects to our topic of to combat the racism. The mobility of students is the ultimate goal, as I said before, and we have to overcome technical problems. For that reason, we are convening a meeting of ministers of higher education next year in 2023. And based on the decision that they took some years ago to expand the Erasmus to the Mediterranean, it should be easy for them to overcome those technical problems. But I think that behind those technical problems, there is a sort of cultural challenge. And we have to be aware about that. It's not only a technical issue, and we are, working more and more in terms of getting closer those two cultures. So it has been said before, the promotion of intercultural dialogue, interreligious dialogue, and that is part of the process of a change of mobility of students. Will be part of the next month's objectives for us, for the Union for the Mediterranean, and more particularly for me as part of my responsibility here. So that important gathering of the 42 ministers of higher education will take place in the coming months. And in the paper that we have shared already with all of them, we speak about racism, intercultural dialogue, image of the other, and so on. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Ambassador, for this input. And it's always good to know what governments are after. And also, it's good to know that the ministers of 42 countries are interested in discussing also intercultural and interreligious perspective of the student exchange. And of course, enhancing the Erasmus projects. And I'm sure that the Dean of our faculty is going to engage afterwards on the exchange of Erasmus, because our faculty is also part of it. Without further ado, I will turn to the public and to the students. We had more than 80 people this evening on the other side of the screen. So do you have any questions for our distinguished speakers this evening? Okay, there are no questions from the public. John, would you like to comment something on Erasmus concerning our faculty?
It's okay. Thank you, Elizabeth. Sure. I want to thank the 4 speakers for tonight, for this event, for this wonderful input you gave, all 4 of you. And because of Elizabeth who asked me to say something about Erasmus, I will do. And I really enjoyed the last speaker as well, Alvaro. And I just want to say that you're talking about student mobility, and that's a very important tool for us, for institutions of higher education, to do some cultural exchange, to learn to know each other. But I also see that there's some high rambles, high obstacles to take, barriers to take, is the language. Because students who go abroad has to be able to understand and speak and write in English. And that's not for all countries the same thing. I mean, it's very easy for us in European context, but I think in the South it's not so easy to do. So there's something we have to work on. How can you deal with that kind of things? Maybe you have some experience on that field.
Can I answer, Elisabetta?
Yeah, please.
So very quickly, yes, that has been a challenge also for Europeans in the change within the European Union so far. So we acknowledge that is a challenge, but at the same time, we acknowledge, and that has been part of my change of views with the representatives of the European Commission, and also with the politicians from different countries about this initiative. We acknowledge that the most important experience in that year of Erasmus is not the academic background, it's the cultural exchange of students and the knowledge of the other. And we have to also to go in that direction when we will accept students from Southern and Eastern Mediterranean countries. And by the way, not only accepting them in Europe, but also promoting the change of students from Europe to those countries, to Egypt, to Morocco, to Tunisia, to Jordan, Israel, and so on. And that is the part of the challenge, because in some cases they are not prepared to have a curriculum in English, but only in Arabic. And you know also the differences between Arabic from Morocco and from Egypt and so on. So the challenge is enormous for Europeans to go to those countries. But again, I think that is not the most important issue, and we should be aware about that and take the risk and move forward.
Thank you. Thank you both. Thank you, John, for posing the question, and thank you, Lara, for this very interesting response. And I hope we will continue to work in this direction in the future with much more strength, energy, and economic power. The next question goes to Audrey. What relations can be established between racism and economic power?
Thank you so much, Elisabetta. You know, this is a very important question because historically religions have been very instrumental in helping to address humanitarian work. So they, through their faith, they have done selfless service. They serve the poor, they feed the hungry, they serve their communities in need, regardless of race, color, and religion. And it has been truly a remarkable history of helping one another. So they've really stepped in when governments could not fill the gaps, especially in times of disasters. And they certainly need to continue in that vein. And since our global challenges are becoming more complex, as we try to accommodate the nearly 8 billion people in the world, we do look to our communities of faith to continue to help their neighbors in need. So that has been an important role of religious communities. But also, we have to examine the financial infrastructures, the economic infrastructures that have been creating more and more the accumulation of wealth into fewer hands, the loss of the moderating balance, the fulcrum point of society, which is the middle class and the growing masses of poor. And there has to be a deep analysis as to why this is coming about. And I will posit to you that the economic financial infrastructures that we have created, especially within the last 70 years, that have built its power on countries of dominance, on that dominant paradigm, you know, whether through the history of colonialism, the slave trade, etc., where the commodification of people into commodities rather than as human beings. So the slave trade, etc. So what we have the examination here of is the disparity in the power dynamics. So we cannot look at the current situation on the global landscape without really examining the power dynamics and the infrastructures that have been created that basically perpetuate that power into the hands of, colonial interests. We have neocolonialism today in its many manifestations. So what can religious communities do? I think religious communities are looking into that examination and are, also having vibrant civil society participation in non-secular ways, even though they have, a religious base. So I think that they continue to work very diligently in helping to serve communities in need. At the same time, I think that they are looking at more and more the critical analysis as to whether or not the economic power structures and the fact that these economic power structures now see the national security interest of the member states to be access to resources. And so the wars that have been created and may continue to be created over access and acquisition of resources as a national security interest for the member states becomes especially important as part of the critique of the economic power structures and what religious communities must look at more deeply and how they can also address it.
So, for this very interesting response, and I think there is still lots of work which needs to be done in this way. We are going to continue with further questions. So one question comes from to Ivan. Ivan, do you think that religion as it is imposed today in the Western Europe should be reserved to the strict private sphere? Is this preferable in your opinion? And another question for Alvaro is, doesn't the Erasmus program discriminate against families who cannot afford it? So, Ivan, the first question is for you.
Thank you very much. I like the question. It's interestingly formulated, and I know it is a source of sometimes frustration in discussions between religious, non-religious, and state leaders. I think it's delicate to say to delimit it to the private sphere sounds like a form of restriction on the freedom to express one's belief. And so I wouldn't have chosen this wording because I don't think it's accurately useful in the context of the discussion we have around racism. What I think that could be useful and that is the best way to lead a system, and I think it's going in the direction of the person who asked the question, it's more to have a separation between church and state. What I mean with that is that when one religion is preferred by a government or there is a formal state religion, we observe that this preferred religion has a special relationship with the state, and this could incline a certain form of discrimination of other beliefs. I take as example countries like Saudi Arabia, for instance, where there is only one state religion. We see it is delicate for other religious communities to emerge and to develop freely. Now, there is a counterpart that is that is not positive either. It's the example of China, where technically religion is being made plus minus illegal. There is Confucianism, but it's not considered as a religion. And there is a form of intolerance towards any form of religion, which is also not the wishful situation. What I think is more useful is when you have a neutral, secular state, then this allows every single religious community to be treated equally under that state. And that is what I think is most useful. I mean, if you want Jews, Muslim, Christian, Protestants, Scientology, Quaker, whatever movement we want to Baha'i, if we want them to be all treated equally and be able to coexist, we should avoid that one religious family is getting the power over all the others and will be able to define the rules for all the others. Because if that is so, then there is discrimination of the other religion. Does this answer of neutrality of the state make sense? And I think it's also the ideal situation when you want to avoid racism, religious racism, Christianophobia, Islamophobia, anti-Semitism, or even humanist discrimination, because we observe that now there are quite a few countries in the world where saying that you don't believe in God is enough to be jailed or put to death, to have a death penalty for non-believers. So that is also not a situation that is wishful for religious collaboration, cooperation, coexistence, and coexistence with non-believers. Does this make
Yes, thank you so much, Ivan, for this very extensive response. It's just shows that we have lots of things to do. I mean, all together in all parts of society, in academia, in media, as governments, in governmental programs, laws, policies, and so on. Alvaro, over to you, and you have also additional question. Erasmus means mobility. What about ecology? Ecological approach to Erasmus program. So one is about discrimination for the families who cannot afford it, and another aspect is mobility. How do we bridge the two?
All the documents, all the notes that I have read about the implementation of Erasmus in the Mediterranean area deals with inclusiveness from different points of view, from gender point of view, from economic and social point of view, from the point of view of ethnic origin, and so on and so forth. So that is part of the conceptual basis for the program in the Mediterranean. And the challenge now is to translate that into reality. And as I said before, we are at a very early stage in the implementation of that initiative for those technical problems that I referred to before. But that's part of my responsibility as well in terms of not forgetting that can be a challenge in the implementation of the initiative and leave people or families behind simply because they don't have enough resources. But the budgetary provision is huge, and in principle there shouldn't be any kind of discrimination for those regions. We'll see.
I think that we have exhausted all the questions for this evening, and because it's already 1 hour and a half, I would really like to thank to all of you, to all speakers and listeners. To Audrey in New York, to Ivan here being in Brussels, to Betty here being also in Brussels as our faculty, and to Alvaro being in Spain. Thank you so much for all these diverse inputs. I wish you a nice evening, and also we expect you on 29th of November in another webinar at 6 o'clock. We are going to discuss freedom of religion or belief at stake. What can we do to eradicate anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and also anti-Christian hatred, but also anti-humanist hatred. So we are not going to forget also our humanist friends in the discussion, because something that you have mentioned also about this challenge that humanists are also facing within the world, and they are being prosecuted. So have a good evening and see you soon.